How's it going, people? So, I think today my rambling is going to be a little bit of an extension from yesterday's. And some of the things I wanted to talk about that I'm glad that some people started DMing me questions about nutrition was to kind of start going a little bit more specifics. But let me say what I said yesterday. Keep in mind, under normal circumstances, when I would set up any of my clients with a nutrition program, it takes me about a half an hour to do so. And I want to say that half an hour is the beginning of the conversation. It is never something that ever is really going to end. And a lot of that has to go down into specifics, goals, body type, yada, 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 yada. So, it's complex. But I wanted to start throwing out, because usually it's going to start leading into the conversation of supplements, vitamins. And nowadays, I think that's very necessary. I would even say under normal circumstances, it is necessary. But if I had to start talking in terms of like immunity health and things of that nature, excuse me, it becomes even more necessary. So let me explain. And I'm not even going to start using the COVID backdrop in this explanation. So let's say, hypothetically, that you're somebody that's trying to lose maybe like 15, 20 pounds. If I was to make a mass section of it, I would have to figure out how much calories do you usually burn in the course of a day. That's your ground zero. Doesn't matter what you do, whether you're an accountant, you sit at a desk, or whether you work construction. Whatever you do before you start it, that's ground zero. Okay? So, the total number of calories that you burn in the day, that's a good starting point. I can start talking about BMRs, basal metabolic rate, which kind of stands for the amount of calories your body needs just to survive. And that's a base understanding of what some people, and you can actually look that up online, and there is different equations for it. But once you figure out that number, obviously it starts differing per person. Okay? What that means to just survive, in other words, theoretically, if you ate that amount of food, whatever that X value is, you're not going to gain or lose any weight. Trust me, there's a lot of different variables that go into that. But for the sake of argument, you don't gain or lose any weight. Anyhow, what I said was 3,500 calories equals a pound of body fat. So if I was to lose 1 pound of fat over the course of a week, that means that I'm going to have to find a calorie deficit of 500 calories. We can find that deficit by either working out, increasing our calorie output, or by decreasing the amount of calorie input, or how much food we eat. Okay? So, whatever that basal metabolic rate is, I'm going to use that as partial math. Then if I was to subtract 500 calories out of that number, then I would be in the contentions of losing about a pound of fat a week. Okay? If I was to increase that amount, let's say 500 on top of it, then I would start gaining weight, which in my case, since I was talking about goals yesterday, is typically what I try to do in terms of I'm trying to gain muscle mass. In order to gain muscle mass, you put more energy into the system and have the appropriate amount of exercise and conditioning in order to stimulate more muscle mass. Okay? And that's kind of that in a nutshell. So that's why for the people that want me to help them out on that, I usually need to know their height, weight, and age in order for me to start kind of developing some of these numbers. Okay, like I said, basal metabolic rate is actually something, there's different equations for it, but let's take this as pretty close and definitely a better guess at trying to figure out what our internal gas tank is than us not knowing, which is how most people kind of approach fitness as a whole. And we just kind of do umpteenth amount, or people will just start kind of starving themselves, not really figuring out how much food they intake to begin with. We'll figure that starving themselves would be part of the solution, which I said output or input of energy is one way to get a deficit, but then what's that number? If you didn't know what that deficit amount was, then what? You're just going to stop eating lunch, which I think is a practice that a lot of people start doing. Well, what if your lunch was only one of 2 meals that you actually had in the course of the day? Just cut out 50% of your calorie intake. And that's even under the assumption that some of us even eat hearty lunches, right? I think a lot of us, we end up getting so busy throughout the day that, hey, you know, this call ended up taking longer than expected. I didn't realize the meeting was going to go further. I didn't know that this, that, and the other needed to happen. Oh well, I skipped lunch. 2 things are going to happen as far as the rubric of things that people do afterwards. Either A, you're going to go home now in a state of starvation. I know that's maybe too strong a word, but you're going to feel more compelled to eat more when you get home for dinner. Okay? Not to mention, I think for most of our lives, you know, in the working version of some of us in our schedules, we tend to skip breakfast because we're so inundated with, holy crap, I gotta get on the highway before traffic starts going. Stuff like that. And I know that to be true in practice, number one, because when I would start doing these analysis with my clients, which I said is always an ongoing argument. I shouldn't say argument. Really should just be a discussion. Granted, sometimes people really have strong emotional attachments to food. Let me tell you. I digress. My point is that when I start seeing people over at Starbucks, it's a long ass line, which I still find pretty funny because it's still a long ass line at Starbucks. That's people's breakfast. Which, for the record, black coffee is about, I think it's about 2 or 3 to 5 calories for a cup of coffee. That ain't anything. I probably burn more calories the last 3 sentences I said. On the flip side,